We start this section on microeconomics by understanding supply and demand and how they are directly linked to pricing. Demand is the amount of a good or service consumers want and are able to pay for it. If they just want it but have no means to afford it, it is not considered demand. What consumers pay to obtain such good or service is called price. The amount demanded by the market of a certain good or service is called quantity demanded. There is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. That is, as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down and vice versa, as represented by this demand curve. The more we raise the price of a certain product, the less would be the number of buyers that are willing to pay that price or can afford that price, and so the demand will fall. Supply is the amount of good or service a producer is willing to supply at a certain price. A rise in price is the number curve. The more we raise the price of a certain product, the less would be the number of buyers that are willing to pay that price or can afford that price, and so the demand will fall. Supply is the amount of good or service a producer is willing to supply at a certain price. A rise in price encourages suppliers to produce more of the good or service, and thereby increasing the quantity supplied, and vice versa. When price goes down, suppliers reduce the quantity supplied, as represented by this curve. As we combine the supply curve and demand curve, we find that they intersect at a certain point. This is called equilibrium. And the coordinates of this point represent the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Simply put, at this point, the consumers and suppliers agree. This is where the quantity supplied by the supplier is equal to the quantity demanded by consumers. At a price higher than the equilibrium price, the quantity supplied by suppliers will be higher than the quantity demanded, and so there will be an excess supply or surplus. At a price lower than the equilibrium price, the quantity supplied will be lower than the quantity demanded, and so there is going to be an excess demand or shortage. The market is dynamic, and at any time it moves away from equilibrium, it finds a way to come back to equilibrium, either by actions from suppliers or buyers. For example, when you have a product at a price that is higher than equilibrium, and so the demand on the product is lower than the quantity you have produced, you will start reducing the price in order to clear the excess inventory you have on hand. On the other hand, when a price of a certain product is lower than what suppliers find profitable, they stop producing it, and consumers rush to buy the available quantity on the market and start bidding up the prices, until it becomes profitable again for suppliers to start producing more of it. The previous supply, demand, and price dynamic assumes that price is the only factor affecting supply and demand. It's important here to note that a higher or lower price does not shift supply or demand curve, but instead it causes a movement along the supply or demand curve itself. What we are going to explore now are factors that can shift the supply or demand curves either to the right or to the left. Income plays an important role when it comes to demand. When the economy expands and raises income levels for most of the population, the demand curve will shift to the right, so that at any given price point, the quantity demanded will be higher, because now more people can afford and have the will to pay a higher price. This, however, doesn't apply to all products on the market. For many products, this concept will normally apply, and these are called normal goods. However, as the economy expands and people become more prosperous, they will shift from certain products altogether towards better products that they previously couldn't afford. These products they shift away from are called inferior products, and the demand curve for these inferior goods will shift to the left when income increases. Other factors that shift demand curve include changes in taste. People could move towards or away from products due to changes in their taste over time. Depending on the change in taste, this could shift the demand curve to the right or to the left. Changes in population. Depending on the product and the target market, such changes could affect demand for better or worse and will shift the demand curve. Changes in prices of related products, such as substitutes and complementary products. This will increase or decrease the demand on the original product. Expectations about future prices. For example, if people expect prices to rise in the future, they will rush to stock up on items from now. This will shift the demand curve. Similarly, there are factors that affect the supply curve, and these include production cost. When costs of production rises, the product will become less profitable for the supplier to produce at the same old price, and so the supply curve will shift to the left. When the cost of production falls, on the other hand, the company would want to supply more to profit even more, and so the supply curve will shift to the right. Other factors that affect supply include natural conditions, such as changes in weather or climate. New technology could lower the cost of production. Government policies, such as taxes, regulations, and subsidies. All those factors can shift the supply curve to the right or to the left. As we explained before, the market is very dynamic and it shifts very quickly as a response to a lot of factors. So you might find yourself in a situation where you have conflicting factors all at the same time, and you want to find out the new equilibrium point while taking into consideration all those factors. For example, you might expect a shift in the demand curve to the right because income is rising where you operate. But at the same time, you find out that population is shrinking in the market, or there is a change in taste that is not in favor of your products. How can you be able to predict demand in this case? The answer is to look at every factor in isolation, by assuming other factors are constant, and then see how each factor will affect demand on its own and to what extent. And then at the end combine all the findings from all factors together to produce a better picture that has taken into consideration all the conflicting factors. While analyzing each factor and its effect on supply and demand, you can use this 4-step process. Draw the demand and supply curve before the economic change. Determine whether the economic change you are analyzing affects supply or demand. Decide whether this change will shift the curve to the right or to the left. Figure out the new equilibrium and compare the old equilibrium price and quantity with the new one. Repeat the process for all the different factors you are analyzing and come to a new conclusion for the new equilibrium that takes the different factors into consideration. As we've seen from studying the supply and demand curves, that as price changes, quantity also changes along the curve, and this applies to both supply and demand. But is this change in quantity always equivalent to the change in price? In other words, if I raise my price by X%, will that always translate to an X% decrease in demand? This depends on price elasticity. Price elasticity is the ratio between the percentage change in quantity demanded or supplied and the corresponding percentage change in price. It's calculated as price elasticity of demand or price elasticity of supply. The result could either be elastic, unitary, or inelastic. An elastic supply or demand is when the ratio of increase in quantity to increase in price is higher than 1. This means that changes in price induce higher changes in quantity. On the other hand, inelastic supply or demand indicates lower responsiveness to changes in price. To calculate elasticity, economists use the average percentage change in price and quantity and apply the following formula. Price elasticity of demand equals percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. It should be noted here that because demand and price move in opposite direction, the result is always negative. So we take the absolute number and ignore the negative sign because it's a ratio. We want to find out if the result is greater or smaller than 1 in absolute terms. Let's explain this through an example of a hypothetical demand curve and calculate price elasticity of demand. In this curve, we can see that if the product is sold at $30, the demanded quantity is 1,550 pieces. As we increase the price, the quantity decreases until it reaches 800 pieces at $70 price. Now let's calculate the price elasticity of demand between the points B and A. That is between selling at $35 versus selling at $30. We apply the formulas. Price elasticity of demand equals percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. To calculate percentage change in quantity, we calculate 1,550 minus 1,400 divided by the average of 1,550 and 1,400 and then multiply by 100 to get the percentage. So the result is 10.2%. It means the quantity has increased by 10.2%. We apply the same formula for the change in price and we get a change of minus 15.4%. This means as the price has decreased by 15.4%, quantity has increased by 10.2%. Now to calculate price elasticity of demand, we simply divide 10.2 by 15.4. And as we said, we ignore the minus sign because we want to get the ratio only, so we get 0.66, which is less than 1. Since the result is less than 1, this means that the demand is inelastic. It means that increases in price by a certain degree will lead to decreases in quantity demanded by a lower degree. For example, here, a change of price by 1% will lead to a change in demanded quantity by 0.66%. It should be noted here, though, that elasticity across the demand curve is not constant. For example, if you try and calculate price elasticity of demand between points G and H, that's between selling at $60 versus selling at $70, we notice that although the change in price is the same, 15.4%, the corresponding change in quantity is now at 15.03%. So the inelastic demand at higher price is getting more towards unitary demand, where change in price leads to equal change in demanded quantity. Of course, having an inelastic demand is favorable for a retailer, and retailers who possess such inelastic demand for their products are said to be having pricing power. That is, they can increase their prices without demand on their product being heavily affected. And so they can increase their profits or respond to external changes such as inflation easily without much damage to the business. For example, in the last few months in 2022, with inflation rising to almost 9%, most retailers were forced to raise their prices to pass higher costs to consumers. It has been noticed, however, that most luxury brands have not been affected by increasing their prices, as their customers still went and shopped at the higher prices. Such brands are said to be having pricing power.